Shalom. Today's Daf Yomi will be the Daf Yomi for Shabbos, Nedarim, Pei Aleph, Nedarim 81. And of course, we'll do this in greater detail on Shabbos Kodesh, but for now, at least we will go through it in a superficial manner. So, what a beautiful Daf. Shalchom mitam, they sent a message from the land of Israel to Babylon. Hisharu ba'arvu visa. They sent the following message to Babylon. Be careful, they said, with your cleanliness, meaning to say, be careful to wash, to take a bath, and to launder your garments, because we don't want you to come to insanity, which we said that if you don't launder your garments, you're going to become, your mind's not going to be stable. Then hisaru bechabura. You should be careful to always study Torah in a group setting. A person should not study Torah. I mean, it's okay once in a while, but in general, Torah is meant to be studied in a group setting. Because for two reasons. The group setting is what's going to help your mind be sharper, both for the teachers and for the students, but also the group setting is going to give us chizuk. When we study Torah together, we're going to get chizuk from each other and we'll be strengthened. And hisaru b'bnei aniyim, be careful with the poor people. Shemehen teitzei Torah, because from the poor people, Torah study will come forth, as it states, Yizal mayim midal yo. So Yizal mayim midal yav, that the water drips down from the bucket, but the Gemara understands it here, I mean from the poor people. Shemehen teitzei Torah, because from the poor people, Torah will come forth. The Ran explains because they have no business. What are they going to do? They're not going to spend their time trading stocks. They're going to spend their time studying Torah, and also they have humility. And then the Gemara asks, how come Torah scholars sometimes and often don't produce other Torah scholars? Amar Rav Yosef explained, Shelo Yomru Torah Yerusha Hilahem. We don't want people to think that Torah is an inheritance. Torah is not an inheritance. It's a heritage, but not an inheritance. The reason is we don't want the people to be arrogant. We don't want Torah scholars to be arrogant over the community, because since they see that the Torah is not leaving their children, they're going to think that they're better than everybody else, and they'll come to be arrogant. They're acting arrogant on the community. It's not that we're afraid they will be arrogant. They are arrogant. As a punishment for this, they're not going to merit that their children be able to study Torah. Shita Mekubetzis explains that what's the source of the dispute between Rav Sheshes, it says they will be arrogant, and Mar Zutra, that they were arrogant. That according to Rav Sheshes, it's not a punishment. It's still that we want to prevent them from sinning by becoming arrogant if they see how their children are great Torah scholars. But according to Mar Zutra, it's a punishment because they were arrogant. That Mar Zutra didn't want to explain like Rav Sheshes, because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking it's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking a collateral that you don't sin, and that's not fair. So the Sefer Tiferes Zion says there's actually not a dispute here, that even according to Mar Zutra, the reason is so that they don't become arrogant. But he thinks that, but he's saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to be concerned that you will be arrogant unless you already started to be a little arrogant, and that's why they're punished. Okay. Rav Ashi says, Mishum Dekaru Inshei Chamer. Rav Ashi says, no, it's because they call people donkeys. By calling the people donkeys, you see that they think that they're better than them. They think that they're genetically superior because they say, you're like a donkey. I'm like an angel. I'm so smart. Ravina says, that they don't make a bracha on the Torah. Very powerful phrase. They don't make a bracha on the Torah before they study it. What does this mean? They don't make a bracha. The bracha represents that you're saying you're not just studying like an academic pursuit, but it's something that's spiritual. It's a conversation with God. Bracha represents love, that they don't have love in their Torah. What does it mean in Jeremiah when it says, who is the wise man who could understand why the Jewish people were sent into exile. So why do we lose the land? And the verse explains that this matter was asked to the wise men and to the prophets, and nobody had an explanation. Below Pirshu, they weren't able to explain it until God Himself explained it. As it states, Vayomer Hashem azvames Torasi, because they abandoned my Torah. Hainu lo shamu bekoli. That's what. So what's the difference? It says azvames Torasi, and then it says they didn't listen to my voice. So which is it? So the Gemara says, azvames Torasi, hainu lo shamu bekoli, hainu lo hochaba. That's also the phrase that they didn't go in the path of the Torah. So what's going on here? So because they didn't make a blessing before they studied Torah. So you might have thought, the way the commentators explain, you might have thought that the prophets were saying, we don't understand, why are the Jewish people being punished? They're all studying Torah. Yeah, it looks like they're studying Torah, Hashem says, but if you go closely, they're studying the topic, but they're not studying Torah. They're not going into the depths. They're not studying for the right reasons. The Torah is not pure. They're not making a blessing before they study. Isi bar Yehuda lo also Mesivta Rabbi Yossi Tlasi Yomim. Isi bar Yehuda, he didn't come to the yeshiva for 3 days. Yeshiva of Rabbi Yossi for 3 days. Ashkechei Vardimos bar Rabbi Yossi. So Vardimos, the son of Rabbi Yossi, found him. Amalei, my time will also Maro Bei Midrash. He said, why don't you come to the base Midrash? The Abba, why don't you come to father's base Midrash for Hatlas and Yomin? Amalei, Kitame da Avucha lo yadana hechi Isa. He said, I'll tell you why I didn't come. He said, the reason why I didn't come, that because I didn't know what's the source for a law that your father had said. So he said, okay, so say the halacha you heard, and I'll say the reason. He said, so I didn't know that which it states that they said in the name of Rabbi Yossi, your father, that one town has water for laundry, it takes precedence over the other towns' need to drink water. What's the source for this idea? So the Gemara says, so what's the source for this idea? It says in Bamidbar that their fields should be for their animals and for all their chayos. So this verse refers to the city of the Levites that were around them. They were commanded to leave open an empty field for the purpose of their animals and for their behemoths and for the chayos. But my chayasam, what's the difference between a behemoth and a chaya? If it says chayasam, it refers to an animal. That refers to a behemoth. It's already included. So why would it repeat it? Chayasam mamish. Chayasam is their actual life, meaning to say you should have their fields for their animals and for their life. So it means chiyusa mamish. So pshita, of course, it's obvious that you have to leave the field over so that you could live. Meaning to say that, of course, the fields will be for them if they need to live. Alav kfisa. So it means here for laundry. Da'ika Sarah there buvisa. That if you don't have a field for laundry to do laundry, and then there's going to be the distress of insanity when you don't launder your clothes properly. And so we see from here that you should leave, that your laundry is part of life. But the Ran says we paskin like the Rabbanan who say that not bathing, who says that preventing from bathing and adornments is going to be considered inoy nefesh, affliction of the soul, and so therefore the husband can annul these vows of their wife. And the Ran also writes that the Rambam paskins la'alacha, like Rabbi Yossi, that the ability to annul these vows is not because of inoy nefesh, but because of beino beino. That the Rambam does not paskin in general like the Rabbanan here. So Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi said these vows are not considered to be vows of affliction. So these vows of not bathing and not putting on adornments, Rabbi Yossi says these are not vows of afflictions of the soul. So the question is, can he annul these vows because there are matters that relate between him and her? Tashma Rabbi Yossi ein elo nidre inoi nefesh. So we have a brayso where Rabbi Yossi says these are not vows of affliction of the soul, but they are vows that relate between him and her, and so therefore he can annul those vows, and they'll be annulled until such time as she remarries. So the Gemara says. So this brayso seems to prove that they can annul them because they're vows between him and her. Whereas this is not a proof. Maybe that brayso says Rabbi Yossi speaking according to the position of the Rabbanan. He says maybe what he's saying is according to me, maybe they're not even vows between him and her. But according to you, according to you, say that these are vows of affliction of the soul. Admit to me at least that these are not vows of affliction of the soul, but they're vows between him and her. And so since we don't have the answer to this, Gemara says, so according to Rabbi Yossi, can he annul these vows that have to do with bathing and adornments because of vows that relate between him and her? So Rav Bar Ava Omer Mayfair. Rav Bar Ava says, indeed, he can annul these vows even according to Rabbi Yossi because they're vows between him and her. Rav Huna says, Ein Mayfair. Rav Huna says he cannot annul these vows even though the matter is between him and her. Shalom atzinu shul shemes ba'afar pir, because a fox does not die in its own hole that it lives in, because the fox knows its hole, and he knows how to protect himself from getting damaged. I mean to say that even though the husband is not going to be careful he's not going to care if his wife bathes or puts on adornments, nevertheless, so therefore the husband is going to be careful, and so therefore he's not going to hurt himself, and so therefore he's not going to care if she takes this vow. And so therefore Rabbi Yossi says if a woman makes a vow she's not going to bathe or use adornments, the husband cannot annul it. So the Gemara says that, so according to Rav Ada Bar Ahava, Rabbi Yossi is of the position that a husband is able to reject these vows not because they're ino nefesh, because they're vows between him and her. So the Gemara says, Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Ada Bar Ahava. We have a brayso, Tosefta that supports Rav Ada Bar Ahava, because we learned in the Tosefta that there are 4 types of vows that a woman makes. There are some that the husband can always reject. There are some that he can never reject. There are some that he can only reject when they relate between him and her, and there are some that he doesn't even need to reject because she's mishubedes to him, because there's like a lien on her. So we're going to go through this brayso. If there's something that's afflicting of the soul, mayfair, then like let's say she says, I'm not going to eat fruit, then the husband can reject this vow, whether it relates directly to him or relates to other people. Let's say she says, I'm not going to eat the fruits of somebody else. But if it's not affliction of the soul, then if it relates between him and her, mayfair. He can reject if it relates between him and her, but if it relates between her and others, he can't reject it. Let's say she says, Amra konam peros alai. So let's talk about these cases. She says, I'm not going to eat fruit. That's a vow of inoi nefesh. So therefore, he can annul that vow. Let's say he says, Konam sheni osel fi abba, fi achicha, fi achicha, fi achi. Let's say she says, she takes an oath that I'm not going to get benefit from my father, from your brother, from your father, from my brother, because that's not considered a vow of inoi nefesh. That's a vow of between him and her, but it's not even between him and her. So therefore, he can't annul it. But let's say she said, and also let's say she says, I'm not going to feed straw to your animal, or water before your cattle. So this is not a vow of inoi nefesh, and it's also not a vow between him and her. Why? Because this is not something that she's required to give for him as part of their ksuva. And so therefore, she's not required as part of the ksuva to feed his animal. So therefore, it's not a vow that he can object to. So therefore, the husband cannot annul these vows at all. So the first case, he can always annul. That's where she takes a vow against fruit. The second case, where it has to relate to his family members or relates to feeding his animals, he can never annul. Let's say she says, shalo echol, shalo efkos, I'm not going to put on like certain cosmetics like makeup or fixing the hair, or she refrains from relations. That he can annul because that relates matters between him and her. And now the fourth case that he doesn't need to revoke is where she says, she says, I'm not going to make your bed. She says, I'm not going to pour your cup of wine. She says, I'm not going to wash your face. Then under those circumstances, the husband does not need to reject these vows because these are all things that a wife does for her husband out of love and to bring them closer together. And these are things that the Gemara in Ksubos told us that even if she has a household full of servants, she should still do this. But nevertheless, the husband does not need to annul these vows because she has to do it as part of the marriage relationship. And so therefore, the vow does not take effect at all. Rabbi Gamliel says, no, that even this vow, even though it doesn't take effect, Yafer, he should still reject the vow. Why? It says in the verse in Bamidbar, if a man takes a vow, we don't want him to desecrate his vow. Rabbi Gamliel says that even where the vow doesn't take effect because she's mishubedes, because she has to do these things for the husband, and so therefore it's not really an effective vow. Nevertheless, the husband has to annul this vow so that this concept of vows is not diminished in her eyes, and so therefore then otherwise she would come to violate this prohibition of lo yachel dvaro. Davar acher, what's another explanation of this verse, lo yachel dvaro, that is his vows should not become desecrated? Another rule is that a chacham cannot annul his own vows, but he has to go to another chacham to annul his vows. As we learned earlier in our tractate, he can't annul the vows, but he can go to somebody else who can annul them. So now the Gemara says, well, how are we going to prove like Rav Ada? Again, what did Rav Ada say? Rav Ada bar Ava said that Rav Ada bar Ava had said that according to Rabbi Yossi, a husband can annul those vows that are between him and her, even though he can annul those vows that are between Beino and Veina. So the Gemara says that we learned in this brisa that when a woman takes a vow not to put on cosmetics, which the husband is not able to reject them because of vows of Inoi Nefesh, but vows that are between him and her. Who's the one who says that if I'm not going to put on cosmetics, if that's a vow of Beino Beina, and that's not a vow of Inoi Nefesh, but it's a vow of matters between the husband and the wife? Rabbi Yossi's position, Vikotani, the Mayfair Mishum Dvarim Shebeino Beina, and we see that this brisa says that you can annul them because it matters between him and her. So it must be like Rabbi Yossi. So this is therefore a support for Rav Ada bar Ahava. So anyway, we learned in this brisa that if a woman takes a vow against tashmish, against relations with her husband, that the husband could reject it because it's a matter between him and her. And so the Gemara asked this question, which we already had in our Gemara. We had it in Ksubos. We learned that if she says that she's not going to have relations, he can annul it because the matter is between him and her. Hey Chidami, what is it exactly that she said? What was the nature of her vow? If she said, I swear, meaning she takes a vow that you cannot get any benefit from me, why does he even need to reject this vow? She is obligated as part of the ksuba to have relations with him. So why does the husband need to reject this vow? The vow shouldn't take effect. So what she says is, she says, I can't have any benefit from you, from your relations with me. That's the language that she uses. So Rav Kahana, the Amar Rav Kahana, and we learned this in Ksuvos already. And we learned this in Ksuvos, I think Nun Tes. What did we say there? Like Rav Kahana said, Hanas Tashmishi Olecha, Kofel Misham Shto. If she says, you are not allowed to have any benefit relations from me, well, then the vow doesn't take effect, and he can force her to say we're staying married and we can have relations. But if she says Hanas Tashmishcha Alai, but she says I don't want to have any benefit from relations with you, then you're fair. Then the husband can indeed reject the vow. Then the husband should reject the vow because then he can't have relations with her because she's not allowed to benefit from him. And you can't feed somebody something which is prohibited. Gemara says, Ma'antana, who is the author of the following brisa? Who's the author of the following brisa? Hadetanya. So the Gemara is going back to what Rabbi Gamliel said, that he says that the husband should reject the wife's vow, even though the vow doesn't take effect, because we don't want her to get used to it. Lo yachel devaro. So who is the author of this brisa who says that if something's permitted, but other people assume that it's prohibited, you're not allowed to act in front of them heter kedei levatlan. You can't try to get them to cancel this custom because we don't want people to become lenient, which things, even though they're permitted, but they've acted like they're prohibited. Money, Rabbi Gamliel. This must be Rabbi Gamliel. The Tanya, Rabbi Gamliel, or Yafer. Gamliel says you should reject the vow, even where the vow doesn't take effect. Mishum shenemer lo yachel dvaro, because we don't want other people to start thinking, oh, vows aren't so serious, and they'll start doing the vows. And therefore, they're going to come to this prohibition. And so just like he's strict about this, so too I'll be strict in that case. We see from here the Torah scholar cannot annul his own vows. So, you know what? We'll stop here. God willing, we'll review this on Shabbos. We'll go a little slower on Shabbos. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address it.